upon a sub-analysis, they found that dampening of amygdala activity directly correlated with improvements in IBS activity. How interesting. Hey everyone, this is Dr. Ruscio. A very important study was recently published that helps us to better understand how a simple gut supplement can improve depression. And we'll unpack this study, we'll give you a protocol, and help you to see how this simple intervention that is gut-derived, gut-focused, can actually lead to improvements in depression. So to kick things off, let's define what depression is. Probably fairly obvious that a low mood, feeling sad, are hallmarks of depression, but one of the more pernicious aspects of depression is having less enjoyment from activities one used to enjoy. So if you used to be an avid reader, or you played an instrument, or you had a certain hobby, and you're doing less of it, you're finding less enjoyment from it, this can also be one of the characteristics of depression. It's important to bear that in mind. Now, from a prevalence perspective, how common is depression? 1 in 10 adults and 1 in 5 of adolescents. And rates of depression are increasing over time. They've doubled during the pandemic. A lot of that is likely due to the concomitant lifestyle effects, but nevertheless, we're seeing this trend of increasing prevalence of depression. Now, one of the things that's really important to understand about depression is that it doesn't all seem to come down to levels of serotonin and dopamine. You may have heard this sort of seminal umbrella meta-analysis that found no correlation between levels of serotonin and dopamine in the brain and anxiety and depression. However, as we're learning more about neuroanatomy and physiology, we're honing in on an important area of the brain known as the limbic system. This region contains the hippocampus, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the amygdala. And specifically, it seems to be this amygdala that is one of the more key areas for us to focus on. It's an almond-shaped gland or region in the medial temporal lobe. And the amygdala governs a few different functions. Emotional processing is one of the most key, but also memory. And if you think about this through an evolutionary lens, the fact that we spent over 1 million years as hunter-gatherers, over 600 generations of people evolved under the pressures of hunter-gatherer living. Well, why is that relevant? Because if you watched your friend eat these, let's say, berries, and then throw up for 4 hours and die, it would be very important to your survival that that berry was driven deep into your memory. And it's in part the amygdala that governs this function. Now, what seems to be happening modern day is, for a variety of reasons, the amygdala is overactive. This may lead to poor memory, but it may more specifically lead to tagging events that are not dangerous or should not elicit a stress response as ones that do elicit a stress response. This is the overactivation of the amygdala or overactivation of the limbic system. And this is a problem because we know that overactivation of the amygdala correlates with an overactive immune system. In fact, in some very elegant studies, they correlated amygdala activity through functional fMRI scans with depression or anxiety, along with more inflammatory monocytes or more inflammatory blood when administering things like endotoxin or LPS. So if you've heard of leaky gut, one of the things that leaks through leaky gut is LPS. This one study in particular found that hyperactivity of the amygdala correlated with blood that was more pro-inflammatory, more reactive to LPS, which leaks through the gut. So, all of this is sort of maybe bring us to this schematic to tie some of this together for you. So in healthy physiology, we have normal emotions, we have normal immune tolerance, we have a normal gut microbiota, so normal flora, the resident bacteria, fungi, some protozoa. Those are all in balance. and you have an intact barrier. That's what you're seeing depicted here by this schematic. Now, in stress physiology, we have depression and anxiety. We have an overactivation of the immune system, like I described a moment ago in these elegant studies showing that people's blood is more pro-inflammatory when they're under stress and or they have a heightened activation of the amygdala. This correlates with dysbiosis. And if you think about it, the resident or commensal microbiota is policed by your immune system. As an example, in inflammatory bowel disease, there's a skewing and imbalance of the bacteria because the immune system is actively attacking the bacterial colony. So part of what can lead to a healthier microbiota is a healthier immune system. So this is the dysbiosis tie-in. And then along with that, you have altered barrier function. So this is the leaky gut. And when things leak through the gut, like LPS, you can have this immune activation. Are you starting to see how a perfect storm or a snowball can perpetuate here? If you have overactivation of the amygdala, you can have disrupted barrier function. Too much stuff leaks through, hyperintestinal permeability, or leaky gut as it's used as sort of a contemporary definition. And this is happening in the context of a heightened immune response. So this is the snowball that we're trying to avoid this, and we're trying to move into the direction of healthy physiology. And again, the key finding I want to bring you to here in a moment is that what's going on in the brain impacts the gut and vice versa. So perhaps direct modulation of serotonin may not be the key, although to be fair, just as a quick aside, even though this recent study that it was an umbrella meta-analysis, very good study, they did not find correlation between serotonin, dopamine, depression, and anxiety. However, there is still validity to the drugs that modulate serotonin and dopamine, right? So that it's careful not to conflate those two. However, there might be perhaps a better therapeutic approach or a complementary one in that if you can modulate this amygdala, you can dampen this whole cascade of physiology we were trying to avoid. And oh, by the way, if you've heard of some of the interesting research in psychedelics, one of the things that happens with, let's say, psilocybin is a reduction of activation of the limbic system and of the amygdala. So just for some context there. Okay, so let's come to the study in question now. This was a randomized control trial in 44 participants, asking the question, do probiotics have an impact on mood and brain health, limbic system and amygdala? IBS patients with depression and anxiety took probiotics for 6 weeks. Okay, what did they find? They found improved depression, improved quality of life, and perhaps most novel, reduced activity of the amygdala. And as we've established, that reduction in amygdala activity correlates with being more pro-inflammatory or more immunoactive. So it's important. This is a really important piece of neurology that's being positively impacted by a probiotic supplement, hence the gut-brain connection. And here is another aspect of the study I wanted to point out for you. I'm paraphrasing. Those with the greatest decrease in amygdala activity had the most improvement in IBS symptoms. So upon a sub-analysis, they found that dampening of amygdala activity directly correlated with improvements in IBS activity. How interesting. Before we go to the specific protocol, I want to make a very important aside regarding testing. One of the things that I have found the most disheartening in our consulting practice is the amount of money that has been squandered in the field of functional and alternative medicine. Patients who do $2,000, $4,000, $6,000 of experimental theoretical testing. So every time I review a study with you, I want to point out, did they use, let's say in this case, stool testing to determine what probiotic to use? The answer, no. Now they did do functional MRIs to track the impact of the probiotic, but there was no stool testing based vectoring of the probiotic. So if you have depression and you want to improve your depression, you do not need to do a stool test to use a probiotic. Important caveat. If your gastroenterologist is telling you to do a stool test or other testing, follow their advice. All right? It's important not to make a sweeping claim that all testing is bad. But if we're talking in the realm of functional GI care, just know that testing is egregiously overused. This is a practice that needs to get called out. I feel, to be a bit candid, this is modern day snake oil. Sounds scientific, sounds necessary, it's not required. So be careful of this if you're not feeling well and your healthcare provider is telling you, well, we need to test X, Y, Z, A, B, and C. In the realm of functional GI care, most of these tests are not needed. This study is a great example of that. Okay, moving on. The protocol. They took Bifidobacterium longum at 10 billion CFU per day for 6 weeks. Now, here are 2 probiotics you can easily find online that are inexpensive. You would need 5 capsules of either of these per day to use the specific protocol from this study. And what we use in our consulting practice is this formula. It contains Bifidobacterium longum, but it also contains a number of other Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium species. 1 capsule will get you to a total of 25 billion CFU per day. And this is the other study I wanted to make you aware of. A meta-analysis of 87 clinical trials concluding that probiotics are efficacious for depression. Now, because it's 87 different clinical trials, the probiotic formulas used differed across trials. However, they shared the commonality that there were blends of Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium, which is why we use this formula. We try to, in our consulting practice, use meta formulas, if you will. What is the best all-purpose probiotic? And so while in the research study that we covered a moment ago, the one clinical trial, they used Bifidobacterium longum. And while this study is very fascinating, especially because of the amygdala tie-in, we have better evidence, a meta-analysis of 87 randomized control trials, demonstrating that a blend of Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium may be best. So you have options. The one thing that was surprising to me when we priced this out was as follows. These 2 products cost $15 and $24, which is great. This is a low financial barrier to entry. However, marketers, especially those who sell on Amazon, know that it's easier to sell a cheaper product. They're not counting on you doing some basic math. So let's do the math looking at the probiotic we recommend, which is more expensive, $44 to $49. But look at this. If you're trying to do a 2-month protocol, which is what the meta-analyses concluded is the best duration, anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, but we'll say 2 months, you would need 1 bottle of the formula that we recommend. You would need 5 bottles of the other formula. And the price difference is between essentially $50 compared to $120 or $75. I mention this because if you don't look at the amount of capsules per serving times the servings per bottle, you can be misled to thinking, well, the cheap product is actually a better value. So just make sure to check the amount of capsules you need for a serving or to hit the target dose, and then how many of those servings do you have per bottle. In this case, the cheaper products actually cost you more in total. Now, all that being said, if you wanted a cheap starting point to assess tolerance, I don't mind the idea of using one of the cheaper formulas. But again, just bear in mind that the lower sticker price isn't always the best value. Now, there's 2 other things I would like for you to be aware of. There are non-supplemental ways to dampen amygdala and limbic activity also. We know that spending time in nature can reduce activation of the amygdala. In fact, in some very elegant research, researchers will take a group of people, have them all go in a functional MRI, scan their brains, then have half the participants go for a walk in the city, and the other half go for a walk in nature. And those who go for a walk in nature have noted an observable decrease in the activation of their amygdala. So a cheap way, essentially a free way, to dampen the activation of your amygdala is to go in nature. The protocol here would be a 1-hour walk, if you can, 2 times per week. You want to hit 2 total hours per week in nature, at least seemingly so, to maximize the benefit of reducing activation of the amygdala. We also know that those who spend more time in nature have a longer life expectancy, or said another way, they have a lower all-cause mortality. And then, similar but different, there's this wonderful app that published a trial in 121 IBS patients known as Zemedy. This is essentially a cognitive behavioral therapist put into an app. Now, could you go see a cognitive behavioral therapist? Sure. However, this would be a cheaper and easier on-ramp since it's a cell phone-driven app. To tie this all together, there's a few different tools at your disposal if you're looking to dampen amygdala activity. You can do the Bifidobacterium longum at 10 billion per day for 6 to 8 weeks. You can do a blend of lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium for 2 months. You can spend 2 hours per day in nature, and or you can use these together. You could trial either CBT or the CBT app Zemedy. If this has been helpful, please like, share, or comment. This really helps us reach more people, which we are desperately trying to do so because we want to save people from unnecessary testing and rigmarole and give them practical science-based advice. And you can also sign up for our newsletter to follow our work and stay in touch with the updates that we're putting out there. All right. Well, this is Dr. Michael Ruscio, and I hope this helps you improve your mood.